What's up, everybody? Welcome in. It's good to have some more games to talk about here on this Celtics beat. Of course, the last show with Tony Allen, again, I saw some of the feedback. We apologize. The Wi-Fi connection on his end was not perfect, so we didn't get every word, but we got most of them. We got the key ones, and it was just great to see TA as part of the show. But now with a crystal clear connection, Adam Kaufman, Evan Valenti, and we got Greeny, Dan Greenberg. You know him, obviously, from all over Twitter. He's doing post-game Twitter spaces now, chatting you up after games. Greeny, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, guys. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday to you. Happy Thursday, I guess, to the Celtics, because as we sit here now, they've got the one more day before they do get back to work, a little long layoff. They last played on Monday. They should be 4-0. We should be sitting here talking about a 4-0 team. They started out 9-0 in Chicago, up 19 early on, and then fell apart, lost by 18. We're not going to use this however long we're talking to fully dissect that game, obviously. It's a week-to-week show, not a daily show, but it was I think in part, and I know that you have to, Greeny, kind of look at this team through a certain lens for as long as they are not at full strength. And they're not at full strength. There is no Rob Williams. You're talking about, perhaps some might say, despite Marcus Smart winning that award last year, perhaps your best defensive player or your most impactful defensive player. So as long as you don't have him, you're not going to be what we watched so much of last year and into the playoffs and everything. But that being said, if I can start with some negative, I'm concerned about the defense. I am. I'm concerned about what we've seen through 4 games.
Yeah, so I want to be careful with that exact topic, just because you can already kind of feel it of, no matter what the Celtics look like on that end, they don't have Rob, so what can you expect? And I already don't agree and don't love that frame of thinking, just because we saw this team defend at a high level for a large sample without Rob. Mm-hmm. So, yes, there are certain aspects of their defense that they have to work through and adjust to, overcompensate for his lack of, dominance on that end. But it still doesn't really excuse them giving up 1 billion points a game. And I wrote this actually this morning for a blog. I looked into it because I'm with you. It's what is so different about this defense? And when you look at it, some of it is how they're guarding the pick and roll. There's scheme aspects to it, which are similar to the early season issues we saw last year, when through the first 4 or 5 games, they were giving up 120 every single night. But then when you look closer, did you guys know that around 39 shots a game, the Celtics are doing what the NBA deems as contested looks, so tight coverage. It's by far their highest amount of opponent shots fall in that tight coverage window. Mm. Opponents are shooting 50% on those shots. Or 52%. They're shooting 50% on contested threes. So yes, while not having Rob matters, the bigger component, I think, is while the Celtics are contesting shots, we've just seen teams like Terrence Ross and Paolo and Zach LaVine. Opponents are making contested looks at a very unsustainable rate, where you would expect over time those numbers are going to come back down, right? I looked it up and compared it to the Bucks. The Bucks have the number 1 defense in the league right now. They are also contesting 39, or they have 39 shots in that tight coverage window. Opponents are only shooting 32% in that. So how different could the Celtics tight coverage be compared to the Bucks tight coverage? And there's such a drastic difference in efficiency. You do have to, on some level, chalk it up of guys are making tough shots. That will level out over time. But they also do have to figure out what they're doing in the pick and roll. I think guards need to be better fighting through schemes. There are things that Mazzulla has to figure out scheme-wise, but it's not time to panic when you actually look at how teams are scoring against this defense.
Yeah, I guess I would have to ask this just real quick, Ev. I'd have to ask this question, though, about the tight coverage stuff is, we on the one hand, and you highlighted this, against Chicago in particular, you saw just them hit a ton of ridiculous shots that ordinarily are not always going to fall. And that's going to happen. Game to game, you're going to see those things, and you'll say, hey, whatever, tip your cap. We were in their face and they hit the shots. But when I hear contested shots, and this is maybe a better question for a coach than it would be for the three of us, as somebody who's on an NBA staff. But
what are you saying, Adam? What the hell?
well, what I'm saying is like, unless you're going to break down all the X's and O's and intricacies of playing defense, like I'd like to ask Marcus Smart this question, for instance. Contested coverage is, that stat is dominated by physical location. How far are you from a given
it's
guy?
2 to 4.
Right.
Yep, it's like 2 to 4 feet.
Yeah, like it couldn't be a simpler barometer for how to measure that stat.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would wonder is what's the difference between that, like being physically like right there in a guy's face versus stylistically the way you are playing defense, where your hands are, where, that type of thing. Has anything changed from last year to this year in terms of, never mind the physical distance, how they are defending that is maybe leading guys to hit some of these shots that they wouldn't otherwise have hit?
Right. And so NBA.com, they also give you defended field goal percentage and defended field goal per game. This year, the Celtics are at 88.5 defended field goal per game, and opponents are shooting 47% on those defended field goals. Last year, it was 88.1 and 43%.
Okay.
So the idea would be, okay, the hands, they may not be like as truly contested, but the idea that like they're just not defending at the same rate isn't entirely true. We've just seen opponents be relatively efficient even through those defended challenging shots, which is bad, right? There's things you need to address there, but bigger picture, it's not like we're seeing it's not like we're seeing this team contest less shots or they're not playing with effort. You have to just work your way through those tough nights, but then how they're getting exposed in pick and roll and things like that are more of a glaring issue that need to be addressed as opposed to this team just isn't playing defense. I would disagree with that.
Yeah. Look at Greeny coming with the numbers, F.
Well, we have 10 million days in between these games. Like my deranged brain just needs to fill time looking at something. So today was the defense.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think I want to point out, just want to throw this out there, the two teams in the NBA Finals last year, Golden State and Boston, two of the best defenses in the league last year, are respectively not so great with Boston. They're in the middle of the pack in points per game given up in the Eastern Conference, but Golden State's dead last, okay?
Yeah. And then you have the Grizzlies last year who were top 3 or 4 defense. They're 30th in the NBA through 4 games. And so
let me ask, though, I'm not judging, I'm clarifying. Do we care more about defensive points per game allowed, or do we care more about defensive efficiency? Because we're talking about defensive rating. The Celtics ranked 25th, which 25 out of 30. It's bad. They were 1 last year, and Golden State is not dead last in that category. It's still bad. It's 22. Bottom third of the league. But I like points per game. That factors in overtime and all that.
Right.
Like
just pointing out,
rating, I guess I lean on more.
They're both bad, and they were both
bad
last year. And by the end of the season, they were the top 2 defenses in efficiency in the league by the time we got to it.
I think when you look at defensive rating or offensive rating or net rating or any of those type of metrics, I think to make definitive statements, you need a 10, 15, 20 game sample, right? Because you could have one awesome game and that drops your D rating, substantially. You could have a game like we saw against the Celtics and, the Bulls where they're hitting everything and that jacks up there. Like there's so much variance early in the season. Right. So for me to start, I care about points per game. They haven't really had any double overtime or anything like that. So I care about points per game, and I want to see how opponents are actually shooting against your defense, right? If it's something like we're seeing where teams are shooting 52% on contested looks, I know that that's not sustainable over the long. I'm not going to freak out about that. I'm going to say, okay, maybe you need to fight harder over screens, or maybe you need to tweak some things. But I think when we look when we want to make definitive, and it's the same way, their offense is the top of the league, but it's been 4 games. Right. We just saw all the same offensive flaws in the Bulls' loss that we saw, in all of their collapses last year. So yes, the Celtics still have the number 1 or whatever offense in the league, but you can't tell me that their same flaws on that end don't exist just because their rating is super high.
Yeah. And the point being, if you contrast this defense to last year's defense, and Greeny pointing out all the contested, shot statistics is actually going to back me up on this. last year, the defensive assignments that were blown is what really got me heated. It was like, man, this team was supposed to be a good defensive team. We talked all year long about, or all offseason long, about how Ime was going to come in, change the defensive culture. And the first couple of months were really rocky. I mean, it was like borderline really annoying to watch a team that has so many great defenders on it just miss assignments and miscommunicate. I don't think that's the problem here. I think, as Greeny has pointed out, there are several factors to play here. One of them being that, like, as an example, DeMar DeRozan took how many contested long twos in that game and hit what felt like 100% of them. It was bizarre to me. The one thing I will point out, though, and this is something that, you can call it the non-Rob factor, if you will. The last three games, because we talked about the Philadelphia game, we were able to react to that pretty quickly right after that game was done. Miami, 46 points in the paint. You look at Orlando at the end of that game, they had 42, and then the Bulls lost. The Bulls had 46 points in the paint in that game. Yep. That's a slight concern. Now, that could be a roster problem. That could be, addressed obviously with Rob coming back at some point. That could be, maybe we have to, do a better job fighting through screens, as Greeny has pointed out. Maybe there's something that they can do to bolster the roster with another big guy. I mean, there's still so many things to tweak here, and Mazzulla is going to be, obviously the timeout thing that we could talk about later, where Joe's just letting them figure it out. He'll adjust to that. He'll adjust to this too. They'll figure this out. But that's if I had to point out one thing that really concerns me about this Celtics defense, because I'm not concerned about anything right now, it's the fact that they've allowed that many points in the paint.
And when you look at it, it's all, you can explain it, because this is a team that through 4 games has the second lowest allowed field goal percentage at the rim. So their rim protection is fine. However, when you look at the non-restricted area in the paint, they're giving up, I think it's around 55% shooting. From the mid-range, it's 48%. From the corners, I think it's 58% from both corners. And when you look at how they're defending, think about it. When you have Al or any of the bigs in a heavy drop coverage coming off a pick and roll, that allows someone like DeRozan or Harden or Paolo to get into that non-restricted paint area. And because you don't have Rob's length to challenge those shots, teams are feasting. From the corners, if you're getting beat on the perimeter and your defense has to collapse, well, how are the Celtics successful? Drive and kick, find open guys in the corner. So when you look at the two areas that they're lacking in terms of they're defending pick and roll and drop coverage, and they're not getting that resistance on the perimeter, that opens up those two problem areas that you mentioned and why they're really giving up so many points. They're still 93rd percentile in transition defense. They're elite at defending the rim. But if you're going to be giving up all of these second chance points and you're not going to be able to prevent people from getting into the paint, teams are going to score on you. That's just how the NBA is.
I guess the bigger picture thing that sort of annoys me, Greeny, and like my Twitter mentions go crazy during games. Yours all the more so, I'm sure, because you're so actively, obviously, tweeting during these things. Like, if you're a regular listener or viewer of this show, you know that I'm not like a complete all the way homer, nor am I overly negative. I certainly skew toward the positive versus the negative. It bugs me, though, when there's a trend, even a 4-game sample, when there's a little bit of a trend that you nitpick on social media. And like for me, it was, don't really like what's happening with the defense right now. And people come immediately back with, what the hell's your problem, Kaufman? They're 3-1. What do you want? Like 3 wins, pretty good. Could be 4 right now. How can you pick apart the defense? Well, again, 25th in defensive efficiency in the NBA right now after being 1 last year. And to your point, Dan, earlier, they spent a decent chunk of last year without Rob Williams and still finished number 1. Rob missed a quarter of the regular season, and they were still by far the number 1 defensive team in the NBA. And pretty much, other than the first 2 weeks under Ime Udoka, they pretty much wire to wire sustained that right on through the playoffs and that finals run. So I think, doesn't mean I think this is going to be a trend that follows them the entire year, because Rob is going to come back at some point and Joe is going to learn some stuff at some point. And they are going to, everyone's going to mesh more cohesively. But right now, and Tatum has said it in multiple post-game interviews, and I like the dissatisfaction on his part, having gotten to, the top of the mountain, but not planted the flag in the top, if you will, in actually winning the championship. I like the dissatisfaction. I like the acknowledgement that they are not completely connected right now. And they've got, if they want to get to where they want to be, they've got some crap they've got to clean up. And I don't know why that, for me, for you, for Evan, for anyone, why that's an unfair thing to point out at the moment. Like, it's not just an everything is rosy, like, Lego movie, everything is awesome. That's not what it is. They've got some issues they've got to correct if we want to see Banner 18.
Right. And I just think it's very important to remember that as good as they looked the last 4 or 5 months last year, as good as they've looked at times to begin the year this year, it's not like they're a team without flaws, right? Like, we know when the Celtics are playing in a way that their bad habits are coming to the surface, because we know what the flip side looks like when they are locked in and they're playing to their potential. So saying like, yeah, there are defensive issues doesn't mean the Celtics defense stinks, or that Smart wasn't a worthy defensive player of the year, or any of these big picture assumptions. You don't do that now, but I think it is okay to say, here are the areas that they are struggling, and here's why, and what they should do to correct it. I think that's just normal as you work your way through. The same way when things go great, it's not like, oh, this was a fluke. It was, this is why it's working, and this is what they can do to continue that. You don't really get that same pushback, right? And I think it's just because they are 3-1 and they are hyped up and there is a bunch of talent. I think there are some that maybe don't want to hear it, because at the same time they are winning. But when you talk about, we've graduated into the level where we're talking about competing for a title, and everything that they do during the regular season has to build up to competing for a title. We are not seeing title caliber defense through 4 games. Some of it, like we said, could be opponent, making tough shots, but other parts of it are scheme related and is a communication and connectiveness issues. But that's normal. It's 4 games into a 6-month season. You're going to have that growing pains early. Let's see what it looks like on Thanksgiving. Let's see what it looks like on Christmas when we have a 20, 25 game sample of what that defense ends up looking like.
Something we haven't pointed out too is, and I think it's fair to acknowledge, we didn't really spend a lot of time on this throughout the summer. I think we all kind of got obsessed with, they're bringing back every important member of their rotation, and there's not a ton of turnover. Now that we're seeing the team, though, it's a different team, and that doesn't mean
every season is different,
right? And by the way, like just so this is not lost, that doesn't mean worse. I actually think they're better. I really do believe that they are better than what we saw last year, and will be better. But right now, like, you've added Brogdon, who is an important piece. Sam Hauser is theoretically going to provide you some 3-point shooting off the bench that you didn't have last year. You have Al playing a much more limited role than what he did last year. And that's going to be like Noah Vonleh is playing important minutes and is going to continue to, especially with Rob out. You've added Blake Griffin. You're just, and obviously you have a different head coach. Like, Greeny, it's a different group. You watch these first 4 games and you're just seeing this is not the same team we watched last year.
Right. You also have Derek White sliding into that starting role, which is new in an aspect of, the lineups that he's playing with. You're not starting Grant at the 4, that they did at times during the playoffs when they were still locked in defensively. So I think it's always important to remember that even though the players returned, they added pieces, development isn't linear. It's basically a brand new organism that they have to figure out how different pieces, and maybe they have to figure out, okay, when we have lineups with Brogdon, he's good at defending pick and roll a certain way, which is then a domino effect for everybody else. Or when we have lineups with White and Tatum and Brown, like, there are things that a team has to figure out and work through, because it isn't the exact same roster we saw last year. They don't play the exact same way that we saw under Ime. They play faster. They're worse on the defensive glass, which makes them have to defend for longer possessions. Like, those are all components that you have to figure out as a new team. Like you said, doesn't mean it's going to be worse, but it also doesn't guarantee that it's got to be better. We have to see what it looks like the same way we did last year. We didn't know if it was going to work with Ime. We didn't know how it was going to look with that collection of talent. They had to prove to us through their play that they could figure it out, and it's no different this year.
Yeah, before we hop over to a different topic, I do want to mention, like, individually, and maybe Greeny, you have some stats to back this up. I feel like individually, Smart and Tatum defensively are playing out of their minds. Like, Smart is doing a whole bunch of smart stuff throughout the first 4 games this year. And Tatum defensively, we've all talked about how he's like an all-world defensive player when he finally locks in. I think through 4 games, it's been a really great stretch for him, both as a one-on-one guy and a team defender. I think they have the defensive pieces to be a very good defensive team. I think it's just going to take a little while, as it did last year, to kind of mold and gel and figure all that stuff out. But, man, do I love watching those 2 guys specifically on the defensive end. Again, I was looking up stats. I don't know if you saw me looking at stuff. I was trying to see if I could find a stat that I really liked. I didn't find one that I really liked to support my argument, so I had
hey, when that happens.
Yeah, it really is not. It's unfortunate. But what I was trying to get at was this team defensively has good pieces, but the 2 guys I just want to highlight what they have done, because those 2 guys have been absolutely ridiculous, and Smart specifically. And I almost feel like Greeny, he's been motivated by everybody was saying, like, oh, he wasn't supposed to win Defensive Player of the Year, because he looks like slightly better this year than he does last year.
I would say we've seen almost 0 drop-off in his individual defense from the caliber that we saw help him win Defensive Player of the Year. In terms of his individual matchups, in terms of his help defense, how he's able to guard 1 through 5. And same thing with Tatum. I just think he's so much more engaged. You can tell he really wants to make an all-NBA defensive team. But I do think tomorrow we're going to learn right away. The Cavs have the perfect combination of elite big play with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And Garland hasn't been ruled out, but even still, him and Donovan Mitchell are 2 elite perimeter shot creators. So everything we want to see about this defense, we're going to find out if they figured it out tomorrow after this break, because the Cavs do pose 2 challenges that have give the Celtics issues through 4 games. So we're going to know pretty much right away.
Yeah, it's just interesting to watch. It's really interesting to watch kind of how it all unfolds and develops, and obviously what direction they continue to go. Evan, you brought up Jayson Tatum. We should talk a little bit about him in particular, because, man, I love what we've seen from Tatum so far. Not only on the floor, but off, in the way that he has carried himself, the way that he will talk about individual awards versus team awards and what he's motivated by, and obviously coming off the finals loss and how that impacted him. And, every interview, it just seems like we're getting a better quote from Tatum about, kind of where his head is at and his maturity level. And it's not like anyone has questioned in the last couple of years his growth into the true leader, the true alpha of this team, but to actually watch it on a daily basis materialize and where he is. I don't want to say that right now, and I know he's averaging like 35 points a game or whatever the hell it is. That's not sustainable. It's not going to maintain. But for him to be doing what he's doing at the start of a year, which we don't traditionally see out of him, we certainly didn't see it last year, I think is so significant. Like, people want to talk about the superstar leap, right? Like from playoffs and what he did, end of the regular season, into the playoffs, to now starting, where he is at this moment and where he wants to be in that MVP conversation, all NBA and all defensive team, first team, all that stuff, where he has put himself to begin this year is so significant, I think, for his personal growth, never mind the team growth, for his personal growth. And I just don't see it slowing down. I really don't.
Yeah. And Evan, I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't think it's only Jayson Tatum. I think it's both him and Jaylen Brown. Like, sure. I am not someone who considers them a number 1 or a number 2 or a 1A and a 1B. To me, I look at them as both 1A players. And even from Jaylen at Media Day, it was the same thing. Everything we heard about from both of them was how much that finals loss ruined their life. So for me, as someone who also had his life ruined for 4 months from that finals loss, that was great to hear. But from the first second of the first game, we've seen both of them so locked in from their approach in these games to how they're committed defensively to how they're holding everybody accountable. I look at their sort of stance as the 2 leaders and building blocks of this franchise. They set the tone. The entire roster has followed suit. And I think if you got it with one and not the other, you wouldn't have sort of that growth and that progress that we're seeing. I think it's the fact that both he both Tatum and Brown are locked in. They are on the same page where we don't care if it's your night, if it's my night, if I'm the guy, if you're the guy. Like none of any of those early issues that were, I had to fight against from sports talk radio in their early parts of their careers. That stuff is done. And I think the change is once you make the finals and you fail in the finals, it changes the mindset of everybody on the roster, right? Like before, we would see them make deep runs, but they never got over the hump. And we would say, man, if only they could do X, Y, and Z, they would finally get over the hump. And we were like, it was like wishful thinking that we knew what the formula could be. Now they got over the hump and they had unspeakable pain and failure. So I think that just changes how a group that's been together for so long, now they know what it takes to get to that level. And I think once you have that perspective, it changes how you play, how you think, how you lead. It all falls into line.
Yeah, I was watching a broadcast of some other team the other night, and I don't know if it was Orlando or Detroit or somebody, and they were talking about they have whatever team it was, has two young players. They're doing the "your turn, my turn" thing, and how much we had to deal with that as Celtics fans watching Jaylen and Jayson try and navigate the court together and try to figure out how to play together. And it was a lot of, okay, now it's your turn, now it's my turn, now it's your turn. The stark difference that you can see this year is those two play off each other way better than they ever have. And it's no longer a your turn, my turn situation where it's like, all right, you get the one that, no, it's no longer that. The decision-making is much cleaner. It's quicker. I love the fact that you're hearing from both guys after games, but primarily Tatum, because Tatum is the de facto best player on the team. I loved after the Orlando win, he was like, we were terrible. We can't play this way. This is not going to be how we win games. We just have to be better. And then after the Chicago game, I also enjoyed the fact I was like, hey, look, there's 82 games in the season and there's playoffs. Like these type of games are going to happen. What we can't let happen is get too crazy and brought down by this loss. But there are things we can learn here in terms of getting ourselves out of the holes that we kind of put ourselves in. So like everything, and this is like one of the things that Simmons killed me with, and I don't mean to kill Simmons in this podcast because it's like 2 weeks from I've done this, where he was like, I'm not hearing what I want to hear from, Tatum, Brown, like they're not miserable. It's like, well, maybe they were miserable in silence, man. Like, because you see that I don't think we have never seen a team since the like 07-08 season, the KG pub. This team is so focused at one thing, and that's being ready for when playoffs come around. Like Tatum, notorious. I love the meme of like, oh no, maybe he's bad. Yeah, now he's getting better, and like that meme is like my favorite meme ever. But I'm just kind of questioning where we are in that meme, because this is a Tatum we've never seen before. And we talked about with Chris Mannix how Jayson Tatum is his MVP pick, off to a tremendous start in terms of trying to win the MVP. Maybe it was right. Maybe him telling Embiid that he better win this one because he's never winning one after this. Maybe Tatum is right, because he looks tremendous. And if he has the in-season leap that he always has, I don't know what that player looks like. Like, I just don't, because everything he's doing right now, he's doing at a high level. And I'm trying to remember if it was the Philly game or a different game where instead of taking a step back three at the buzzer, he drove to the basket.
I know exactly the possession you're talking about.
And I was like, yes, this is it. That's real growth. That's it right there. Like, he is really like, he's putting all the little things together, and it's culminating in. And again, we're only 4 games into the season, so it's really hard. But it's the top 10, top 7, top 5. Like, he is slowly creeping higher and higher on that list, and it's becoming more undeniable, I think, Randy.
Yeah, but that to me, that's what made the Bulls loss so frustrating, is because they kept trying to shoot their way out of their collapse, as opposed to the game before, when they were going to be a 2 to 3 minute scoring drought. We saw Tatum be aggressive and get to the rim and sort of find higher efficiency shots. I'm most interested in seeing, we're all in love with their mental approach. What stood out to me basically until the finals is this team didn't lose 2 games in a row. Their best players never let their losses snowball, right? Well, now here we go. We have a game that you should have won, that you collapsed, doing all the bad habit things that we know lead to Celtics collapses. Now you're facing a good team at home after a long layoff. Show me that you know how to stop the bleeding and respond and play the way you know how to do. So that's what I can't wait to see tomorrow. How do Tatum and Brown, and really all the starters, how do you show that this was actually, Tatum said, listen, this is 1 of 82. It happens. Okay, well, show me that it is just 1 of 82, and you can't get back to playing like we know you're capable of, which is what we saw through the first 3 games, or 3 games and half a quarter, right? Like they were flawless for the most part. Now you have your first bit of adversity. Joe Mazzulla, show me you know how to stop a run and can call a timeout. Show me you can figure out ways to, when you recognize that things aren't working, the players have the awareness to go, okay, let's get something at the rim. Let's get something. Like, when's the last time you saw a pick and roll lob through four games this season? We haven't seen it. And I think when there are nights that they're not going to, they started 8 of 10 from 3 and then finished 10 of 38. So there are going to be those nights where your shot variance is all over the place. Show me that you can go back to the basics and get easy buckets when you know you need them.
Let's talk about this next game just a little bit, not so much previewing it, but looking at it in the big picture sense of what we think of Cleveland right now and going forward. I think it was it Grandiev that was, a few weeks back, we were talking about just the NBA in general in the Eastern Conference, and maybe he was saying that, you might need 50 wins in the East just to get into the postseason.
Right.
You look at where we're at right now: Milwaukee, Cleveland, the Knicks, Celtics, Washington, Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago, all these teams, okay, that's 1 through 8. All these teams already have 3 wins, all of them. And that doesn't include Miami, that's going to improve. It doesn't include Brooklyn's going to improve. It doesn't include 1-4 Philly that's going to improve. The others, whether it's Charlotte, Indy, Detroit, Orlando, whatever. Like there's going to be obviously some movement for some of the ones that I already mentioned that are off to quicker starts, but do we believe in Cleveland, Greeny, as much as like Kevin Garnett putting them in the top 4 in the East ahead of Boston going into the season? How much should we respect the Cavaliers right now?
I think they're, even without Donovan Mitchell, they should have earned respect. I mean, they were a top 4 seeded team last season before Jared Allen got hurt. They had so many injuries. Ricky Rubio tore his ACL, who was off to a great start. They were a top 4 team. They were elite defensively. Their bigs and their size proved to be an issue. Evan Mobley might be Tim Duncan. Like, there are things that you have to respect about Cleveland. Now they add an elite shot creator in Donovan Mitchell. They have, that cohesiveness and another year together of experience. They absolutely can be a top 3, top 4 team, barring health. And I just think that's why this is going to be such a good test, because like Randy said, you may need 50 wins. The biggest thing that I always push back this time of year is when people tell me October basketball doesn't matter. I couldn't disagree more, especially when you're talking about Eastern Conference contender matchups. So head-to-head games against Philly, head-to-head games against Brooklyn, Miami, Toronto. We could very well have a situation just like last year where the top 4 teams are all around the same win total, and you need a tiebreaker to establish home court. So even though this game is taking place at the end of October, it matters that you play well and you beat this team, because that may matter once we get to the spring and the games really do count. So I'm interested. I think they're coached well. They're built well. They have assets to make trades and improve at the deadline in terms of tradable assets and draft picks. So there's no reason you should think of them like this is not the post LeBron, post Kyrie Cleveland of old that couldn't win 30 games. Like, Darius Garland is an all-star caliber point guard. Donovan Mitchell is an all-star caliber point guard. Jared Allen was just an all-star. Evan Mobley won Rookie of the Year, or was in the conversation for he'll be an all-star at some point. So they do have talent, and that's why I want to see, do they overlook them? Because I think they were 3-1 against the Cavs last year or something like that. And they didn't, but those games were fluky because there were some that Mobley didn't play. There were some that Al may have sat. So you have to respect them. They're good, and you're going to have to play defense at a high level.
Yeah. And look, Cleveland is like the fun up and coming team that everybody kind of loves. Let's just pump the brakes slightly. They've beaten Orlando, Washington, and Chicago. So it's not like they've They've beaten the
And the
brakes.
same is true, right? Isn't the Knicks 3-1 record? Same thing. It's like Charlotte, Orlando. So that aspect, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt.
It'll be a good test for both teams. And Cleveland has a great roster. Like, there's no question about that. They have a lot of size, which is going to be a problem for a lot of teams. The NBA has gotten smaller over the years. Well, Cleveland can find a way to stay big on the floor with Allen and Mobley at the same time, which is a problem. But Boston, with the way they start by starting two smaller guards in the backcourt with White and Smart, this will be an interesting matchup. So Cleveland is being this Eastern Conference is going to be a juggernaut. I don't think we've seen this in quite some time where there's so many good teams. Boston will be hopefully in the good to elite part of this, but this is a good matchup early on for Boston. But Boston's had some tests early on. They played Philly and beat them, and went on the road to Miami and beat them. So it's not like Boston hasn't been tested yet. The only test they haven't passed is one they should have against Chicago, but everybody has bad nights. This is, again, a good way. I like how Greeny put it in terms of trying to win 2 games, don't lose 2 games in a row. Let's see if this team can come back against a really good Cleveland team, a good defensive team with good, guards in the perimeter. It should be, we talk about Boston's perimeter defense between Smart and Brogdon and Tatum and Brown and Derek White. This is going to be a challenge for them. Let's see if we all believe that Boston has good defensive pieces, this will be a great challenge. I no idea health-wise. I haven't watched the second in Cleveland this year, I'll be honest with you, so I'm not really quite positive what it all looks like. I've seen clips. Mitchell looks like he's trying harder on defense, so that's really good. The tools are always there. He has some freakishly long wingspan. It's 7'1", right? He's 6'4".
Right. So for him, it was always an effort thing. If he just put in effort, he could be at least a passable defender. And he's so good offensively. If you just get to passable, all right, now he's not a glaring hole when he's on the floor.
Yeah. So it's one of the things I'm looking for. Flip side though is do they have anybody that can check, Jaylen and Jayson? Because one of the things that I love about Philadelphia is everybody loves to talk up Philadelphia every year. And I don't mean to just completely clown on the Sixers, but the Sixers have never had a guy that could guard either Jaylen Brown or Jayson Tatum. As we found out opening night, they still don't have a player that can guard either of those two guys. I'm curious. That's where I'm really curious, because at the end of the day, playoffs come around. It's about stars, and I want to see if Cleveland has some guys that can slow those two guys down, or if Boston will always have an advantage on the wing because they're just too talented at that spot. That's what I'm really looking for. The size stuff I'm not super concerned about, is because Rob's hanging around somewhere.
I wasn't going. Isaac. I was going to say Isaac Okoro will probably guard Tatum. He's a pretty good on-ball defender. But the bigger thing is what they lack on the perimeter. Trying to score over Jared Allen and Evan Mobley is not easy. So it's they may not be able to guard individually Tatum and Brown consistently, but it's kind of like when Rob is on the floor. If someone on the Celtics would get blown by, Rob just cleans it up on the glass. So the Cavs defense is built that way. But their issue is shooting. If the Celtics can make them beat them by, packing the paint and making them hit outside shots, that's the path. If you're going to let Karis LeVert score 50 again, like he did when he was on the Nets, because all he did was just get into the paint, and Mitchell and Garland, if they're getting into the paint, the Cavs can score. If you make them hit jump shots, that's sort of where they struggle.
I was just going to say, and I wasn't planning on going this direction, but because Ev alluded to it, I'm just at a point on our text chain. We talk about this sometimes with a few people, but anytime I hear people take the Sixers seriously as a contender, as a true championship contender, I know that they can win their 50 plus games. They can get to the playoffs, and Embiid is great, obviously. And we know what Harden is, and the heights that Doc has been to, and it looks like they have some talent on that team, but it always looks like they have talent on that team, Greeny. They're to me, they are paper champions. They are frauds. They are not a team that ever actually scares me, just because if they even get to the stage of a deep playoff run, I'm just waiting for them to crumble. I don't believe that they have what it takes to win a title.
Yeah, I think all you just have to do is just compare their roster to the teams that have made the finals over the last, 3 to 4 years, right? How are they stacking up against Milwaukee, Phoenix, Boston, Golden State? They don't have the personnel to defend those teams at a level that is required to win a title. And offensively, right, all those teams are good on the other end. So offensively, teams know, like, okay, you can let Embiid score 45, but they don't have any other shot creators outside of James Harden. And if he isn't, a 2018 version of himself, where is their offense? Who is scared about Tobias Harris taking open looks? Who is scared about PJ Tucker on the offensive end of the floor? Like, Tyrese Maxey is awesome. He's fast as hell. He's an efficient player, but like, we don't know what he's going to look like on the stage of the NBA Finals because he's so young. The same way we didn't know, like, who expected Jayson Tatum to struggle in the NBA Finals? Nobody. So you just look, they don't have the roster and the talent to be in that title contending sort of, upper echelon tier. They can get there, maybe if guys go down or they, get hot at the right time. Because in the playoffs, it's all about matchups, but they're an easy team to scheme against. And once you're easy to scheme against in the playoffs, when teams are actually trying, you're cooked. Like, you can't get over that hump until you actually make defenses fear you. And they most certainly do not do that.
Speaking of pretenders, by the way, will the 0-4 Lakers even win 40 games?
Love it.
Listen, I don't know if you guys have tweeted. Have you seen their next 29 games from now until Christmas?
Because nobody will stop talking about it because it's like, oh, where are the wins coming from? Because this is
right.
Like, even their layup games, like the Spurs and the Jazz, like, they're trying yet. Like, they're not tanking yet. So you really look at their schedule. It's not crazy to think they could be like 1-9, 2-10. Like, they just don't have. And I don't know if you guys saw the Grandy tweet. It's all about their shooting. If they were just league average from behind the arc, they would have the 4th highest point differential in the entire NBA. But they simply cannot shoot the basketball. They have a top 5 defense through 4 games. But it's the same problem like with the Sixers. Mm-hmm. Their roster construction is their issue. It's not like one day Lonnie Walker is going to wake up and be a league average 3-point shooter. It's not. Russell Westbrook isn't going to wake up and shoot 35% from 3. So how they're constructed, there is no way for them to claw out of their hole.
Their offense dead last by a wide margin.
Yeah.
I got a favor to ask of you, Greeny. Your colleagues, PFT and Big Cat, have this award called the Football Guy of the Week.
Yep.
And I need you, on behalf of us and Celtics Nation, I need you to push for a specific candidate. I read this morning from Himmelsbach. I thought this was just an absolute wonderful story about Joe Mazzulla. If you have time to read it, please do. But I'm going to take a snippet from this. And I'd like to nominate Joe Mazzulla for the Football Guy of the Week, even though he's not a football guy. Okay. This is quoting from Adam's story. Quote, at Fairmont, Mazzulla asked his wife, Kamai, I think. Is it Kamai? I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. If they could buy an RV and live in the school gym's parking lot for easy access. He once arrived 1 minute late to a training session and punished himself with a workout so fierce it made his players worry about his safety. He combed through rule books and ended up displaying new guidelines to referees. If when you, to the commitment of buying an RV and living in the parking lot of your D2 college basketball gymnasium, if that's not the Football Guy of the Week right there, I don't know what is. I just need you to on our behalf, Green.
I mean, let's just call that what it is. That is some grade A Celtics porn. I mean, oh my God. I mean, that you can just inject that right into my veins. Like, this dude, like, that is the type of maniac that, like, okay, I'm in. You sold me. Yeah. Give him a lifetime deal. He's the guy. I'm sold.
I only bring this up because I would like to formally apologize to Joe Mazzulla on the show, because when it happened and we reacted in real time, I did the hot take thing. And I felt passionate about it, but I just kind of dove headfirst into it. I thought that the Joe Mazzulla hiring as the interim head coach would be an absolute disaster for a team coming off an NBA Finals, a trip, and to hand it to a guy whose head coaching experience is D2 Fairmont State, I thought is really tough. And I'd like to formally apologize to Joe, because this offense looks unbelievable. I believe in the fact that they have guys on staff that will figure out the defensive part of this. And he doesn't look like he's over his head at all. I think he looks fine. As many people have said, we'll find out come playoff time if he's really ready for this particular thing. But so far, I've been kind of really impressed with Joe Mazzulla. Again, the timeouts thing, I think we're learning on the job a little bit, but I've been their offense looks way better than it did under Ime. Like, this looks like a very complete, devastating offensive team. And I did not expect to see that right out of the gate at this point. So again, I use the great story from Adam just to highlight that Joe Mazzulla, I think, is doing a spectacular job.
Yeah, I think we have to keep two things in mind with Mazzulla. One, we may just have to just trust Brad Stevens with whatever the hell he decides he wants to do. I mean, it's almost ridiculous.
Unassailable right now. His record is unreal.
And the one mistake that he made with Dennis Schroeder, he immediately corrected at the trade deadline. So it's like, that's a little crazy. But at the same time, it is only 4 games in, right? We do need to see how he responds and how he's able to navigate them when they have a stretch where maybe they lose 3 of 5, or things are always easy when you're winning. I think that's been the case forever in sports. I want to see what do people do when guys are sitting in certain moments where normally they're used to playing and the team is losing, or suddenly the offense is stalling and things aren't gelling. Like the same questions we had with Ime, because it was his first time last year, we need to still have with Joe. And you mentioned the timeout issue, that was very early Brad Stevens vibes of just maybe not knowing that you have the ability to stop a run by calling a timeout in the NBA level. Now he knows you can do that. So let's see him apply it. But it's hard to argue that it's been anything other than the best possible start. But I think everything we heard from the best players on the team, they had buy-in. And when you have that collective buy-in, and I think maybe we overlooked the reality of perhaps they're trying harder and they're more on the same page to start because they realized that Mazzulla was thrown into this crazy situation and they all love the guy and they don't want to leave him hanging, right? They want to see him succeed. So it's okay, we know that we have to be, with the right mindset and play the right way at all times because this guy was put in an unfathomable position that up until the first week of September, I don't think he was expecting to be the head coach of the Boston Celtics. So I think while some people thought his inexperience was going to be a detriment and a disaster, there's a chance that inexperience is what brought everybody together and had them locked in, ready to go from the first game.
In the spirit of In Brad We Trust, Heavy.com, our buddy Sean Devaney wrote a piece yesterday for anyone that missed it, basically talking about Celtics trade rumors already 4 games into the season. Writes that, and I'll skim over parts of this, but Celtics are looking to fill their holes in the front court and on the wings with 2 important weapons to do so. The traded player exceptions of $6.9 million for Juancho Hernan-Gomez and $5.9 for, as Greeny talked about, Dennis Schroeder. Multiple league sources told Heavy Sports. It is clear, this is one league executive telling Sean, it is clear they're asking about big guys and they're asking about wings too poking around. They're taking the temperature on what might be out there, who might get released or bought out, who they might have to give up a first round pick or second round pick to get. It's early, so no one's giving up on players now. But when you get to late December, around Christmas, January, seems like they want to be in a good spot to make the call on what to do at that point in time. Sean continues to write about, obviously, some of the financial implications, Al Horford's age, Rob Williams' injury, all of that. Talks about Justice Winslow of the Blazers as an option. We've talked about him for I don't know how long, obviously. The Hawks, Justin Holiday, Torrey Craig of the Suns as a possible TPE option as well. What you think when you saw this article, provided you did, or if you're hearing about this for the first time now, what, in terms of possible targets or guys you would like to see Boston chasing after?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would hope that if Brad and Zarin and everybody are able to identify a weakness, that they would be doing their due diligence to figure out how to address it, right? Like we said, it's not surprising that they would be looking at the big man market because that's an area where we've seen early signs of their front court depth potentially being an issue. I like the idea of maybe someone like Torrey Craig, just because he's kind of like a small ball 4. He can stretch the floor a little bit, but I think he doesn't really help you on your rebounding department all that much. So I think once we get to the trade deadline, we'll obviously have a clear picture, right? But I have no problem with them planting that seed now to say, hey, Utah Jazz, like, why do you need Jared Vanderbilt helping you win games or anything like that? It's still too early where teams still feel like they have a shot where guys may not be available. So for Brad or Zarin or whoever to be like, hey, if in 2 months you get to the point where you need to start thinking of changes, or this guy's an expiring contract on your roster and you don't want to lose him for nothing, give me a call and I'll throw you a second round pick and we'll take him. I just think that is what every GM should be doing when they notice a weakness. In terms of fit, like, I can understand them wanting a guy that can switch and that can stretch the floor and all that. But if you look at how they're playing defensively, they aren't switching everything like in a pick and roll. So why do I have to be concerned that, a potential big man replacement won't be able to guard in space if they're just going to play drop coverage anyways? Then, like, that aspect isn't as much of a concern for me. So I can't imagine they'll stand pat, even with Rob coming back. Like, I was surprised they didn't add – I know they added Blake and all that jazz, but it wouldn't shock me if we get to the deadline and we see someone like Justin Jackson get waived for a buyout guy or anything like that, just because the season is too important to ignore a potential weakness that could compromise the title.
All right, guys, the other thing I want to get to in the interest of time, and saving it for the end deliberately, but introducing this on this program is for the first time, we have decided to start a Celtics Beat fantasy basketball league, a season-long league that we will be tracking throughout this year. It began with the start of the year, so we're already a week plus in at this point, but talking about it here on the show for the first time. The participants include the three of us. Greeny is part of it. In fact, we have two divisions because, I don't know, ESPN made me set up divisions when I created this league. I don't know why that's a thing, but maybe I'm just too dumb to figure out how to turn that off. So we have these divisions named by Evan. The Blog Boys division, which features these two, Evan Valenti, Dan Greenberg, both in there. Keith Smith is in the league. Our buddy Seth Landman, who comes on this show periodically, is in there. Bobby Manning, obviously of CLNS fame, is in that division as well. And the Old Heads division, that includes me, because I do a whole lot of radio and people think radio's dead. So what the hell? I'll be in the Old Heads division. We also have Sean Grandy with his son Jack as co-manager of that team. The recently retired Mark Murphy is in this league. Sean Devaney, who we mentioned before, is in this league, and Gary Washburn is in this league. And everybody with a modest buy-in as well to enhance their participation, maybe. But Greeny, we were talking before we came on about your draft strategy and how you feel things are going for you right now. Evan and I are facing each other this week, as a matter of fact, and we're neck and neck at the moment. What do you think of this thing?
Well, as long as we caveat by saying that, we know that nobody cares about other people's fantasy teams. However,
we do on this show. So,
however, having said that, heading into the draft, I think to the surprise of absolutely zero people, listening or watching to this show, my strategy was just to draft only Celtics players, even though that's so dumb for a daily, type of fantasy league where there are going to be nights where the Celtics are off and I would have 0 points on that day. I wanted it. I thought it would be very funny to just only have a roster of that. Unfortunately, Keith Smith stole Jaylen right before I was able to make that move. What cemented it was Evan passing up on Jayson Tatum.
You're welcome.
So I was able to draft him, which was
regretting it. I regretted it immediately after I did it, and then after opening night, I was like, I really took Embiid over Jayson Tatum. This is going to haunt my life. However, I just want to point this out, just so that the reason why I did it is because every fantasy team that I have drafted this season, football especially, has been awful. So what I did, a little reverse
I like
here,
that.
I couldn't take Tatum because I can't put my bad stench on Jayson Tatum. So I feel like I have a little bit to do with Tatum's hot start. Just a little bit.
All right. Well, we're happy to have it. So.
Yeah, I'm pissed, frankly.
Thank you for doing your part.
I'm pissed.
And then I saw Team Grandy had to make some moves, got rid of Marcus Smart, immediately snatched him up. I feel like as the driver of the Marcus Smart defender bandwagon, I just needed him on my roster. So we've got 3 so far. I have, I think, 9 more spots to fill. So we're just hoping as free agency happens that people have to drop it. But But yeah, I mean, listen, we'll see how it goes. I haven't played fantasy basketball probably since high school. So for me, that's why I'm just like, let me just grab all the Celts I can, and I'll just live and die with this team just like I do in real life.
Are you doing okay?
Well, we're going to negotiate the deal between Greeny and Keith Smith for Jaylen Brown. So I feel like this is going to be a contested.
Yeah. He might be my white whale.
I was going to say I don't have a single Celtic on my team, but I do have Kyrie Irving, so I am just a complete and utter hypocrite.
Yeah.
Jayson points, a guy that I couldn't criticize more on social media if I tried. Are you able to keep up with the? It's season long, but the daily grind of setting your lineup or making roster moves, putting a guy on IR, because you don't know this, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of pushback about making this, daily roster as opposed to, locking in your lineup for the week. Some people didn't necessarily want to have to deal with the headaches of, having to handle all that.
To be honest, I found what I do is every Monday, I set the lineup for the whole week.
Smart.
And then, for example, when, I think it was Herb Jones who I have, he got hurt and hyperextended his knee or whatever it is. I was not on top of, swapping him out and picking some. So that daily management I have to get back used to. But listen, it's not supposed to be easy. There's a dollar amount at stake. So if somebody doesn't want to pay attention to it, I consider that their problem, not my problem. And see you later.
Yeah, and I'm not like I'm gonna have to start to send some texts too, just because whatever. If they want to just give away their money, that's on them. I'm not shocked. Maybe excuse me. I don't know that Washburn is is like a huge fantasy guy, or if he just was like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll jump in. Like, I don't know what the specific motivation was, but he left like 150 points on his bench last night, not setting his lineup. But doesn't totally shock me. What surprises me, maybe just given the generation, if you will, Bobby Manning is not so good at setting his lineup. Bobby, get your act together, man.
Yeah, listen, like I said, if they want to tank their own, if they're going for Victor Wembanyama, all the power to them. We'll take it. I'll take the wins.
That's right. I will, and just to really hammer home Greeny's point about how little people probably care about this, early wins, I will tell you for, let's see, who... I think Evan
got smoked by Murph first week. So
that's right. So Murph won. Bobby managed to win this first game, first week. I had a win. Beacon Hill. Oh, so that's Devaney, the Beacon Hill Beavers. And who's you just got Tatum'd?
Oh, that's me.
Oh, it's you. That's you. So you won. Yeah. So there we go. Yeah. That's some of the team names are decent.
I'll tell you what, ESPN has to figure out it's like impossible to upload a non-ESPN avatar picture.
It's so, I can't.
That is garbage.
The NFL fantasy app is so much easier. I created my own. My team name is Smoke and Shane Falco back when Smoke and Jay Cutler was a cool thing.
Yeah.
That's how long I've had the team. So I just took a picture of Shane Falco with the Madden logo behind him and put a cigarette in his mouth, and it looks hilarious. You can't do that on ESPN. So I don't even bother. I have the stupid
it's embarrassing. I probably spent like an hour and a half trying to find a Tatum kiss of death photo that like ESPN would allow, and they wouldn't accept it, and I just gave up.
Well, you got the headshot anyway. All right, the next three Celtics games that will happen before we return to this show. Two are against Cleveland. There's at the Garden, obviously tomorrow night as we sit here, Friday night. Sunday, early evening, a date with the Wizards. That is also at home. And then in Cleveland on Wednesday. So a nice little gap between Sunday and Wednesday. And then probably back with you Thursday next week before the next Friday game a week from tomorrow against Chicago again. That rematch that the Celtics are going to go out and win by 25 points because they'll be so pissed off. But this was good. A lot of good conversation about the early Boston Celtics and mixing in a little fantasy as well. We appreciate everybody hanging out here with us, obviously. Greeny, thanks for hopping on with us, buddy. And make sure people check out the Twitter Spaces post game and break down all these matchups.
If you're like me and literally every time this team dribbles, you think it matters. We hop on after the game and we rant, we vent. They've been fun. It was It was very therapeutic, I think, for a lot of people coming off our first collapse of the year. And as you can imagine, it was just as exciting when they beat the Sixers on opening night. So appreciative of everyone that hops on and is brave enough to volunteer, because they get a little crazy at times. So
beautiful. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you again soon. Go Celts.